By the time November arrived, shadow would be sleeping across Merewyn's feet every night, warming the part of her that had gone cold the longest. But on that first Tuesday in October, when the fog came in off the hills and pressed itself against every window on the street, neither of them knew that yet. What Merewyn knew that morning was only this. She had brewed 2 cups of tea again. She always brewed 2 cups. She had been doing it for 11 years without deciding to, the way a person breathes, the way a river keeps moving, even when there is no one left to watch it run. She set both cups on the kitchen table. She sat down. She waited. The fog outside was the particular grey of Edinburgh in early October, not a dramatic fog, not the kind that swallows ships or makes strangers miss their turnings on the moor, but a quiet fog, the kind that simply removes the distance from things and leaves you alone with whatever is closest. The stone row houses across the lane had disappeared behind it. The old rowan tree at the garden wall was reduced to a soft outline, its last berries the only colour remaining, small and red, like a suggestion of fire. Merewyn drank her tea. She watched the second cup cool. At 7:07, she poured it down the drain. She had been doing this for 11 years. Since the January morning when Callum had not come down for breakfast, when the silence from upstairs had a different quality to it than ordinary silence, when she had known before she reached the top step that something permanent had changed. She had been doing it before she knew she was doing it. The first morning after the funeral, her hands had reached for 2 cups without her permission. The second morning, the same. By the third week, she had understood that stopping would require a deliberate act of will that she did not have, and she had simply continued. The second cup became a kind of altar. She did not think of it that way. She would have resisted the word entirely. It was simply a cup of tea that no one drank. Merewyn Aldrin was 77 years old. She had lived on Cairn Terrace for 43 of those years, first with Callum and then without. The house was stone, like everything else on the lane, with low ceilings and narrow stairs and windows that sat deep in their frames and made the light inside always feel considered, filtered, as if it had made a deliberate choice to enter. The garden in back had been Callum's. She maintained it now with a care that was practical rather than loving. She kept the weeds down, she trimmed what needed trimming, but she had not planted anything new since he died. The same roses, the same lavender along the south wall, the same gap in the hedge where he had always meant to put a gate. She had one daughter, Saoirse, 39 years old. Living in Melbourne, Australia, in a house with a bright garden and 2 children, Merewyn had met only in photographs and 3 times, briefly, in person. Saoirse had come for the funeral. She had stayed for 2 weeks. She had spoken about the future in the careful, tentative way that people speak about the future when they are not sure the other person believes in it. And then she had gone back. The distance between them had started as geography. Then it had become something else. Merewyn was not certain exactly when the calls had stopped being regular. There had been a period of weekly calls, then fortnightly, then occasional. There had been some disagreement once about whether Merewyn should consider moving closer, some exchange of words in which things were said with an accuracy that was not entirely kind, and after that the silence had a shape to it that was harder to move through than ordinary silence. They still exchanged messages at Christmas, at birthdays. They still loved each other in the way that people love each other when they do not know how to get back to the place where love was easy. Merewyn understood, in the private way that she understood most things, that this was at least half her doing. She was not a person who asked for things. She had been raised in a time and a household where asking for things was a form of weakness, and she had internalized this so completely that she no longer experienced it as a rule. She experienced it as simply who she was, self-sufficient, contained, capable. The neighbours on Cairn Terrace were polite to her. The postman left parcels without knocking, which was the most truthful gesture anyone on the street made. She was the woman in the third house who had lost her husband a decade ago, who kept her garden tidy, who could be seen on clear mornings walking the length of the lane at a pace that suggested she was going somewhere, even when she was not. She was not unhappy, she told herself. She was simply alone. The first morning shadow appeared. Merewyn was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing her single plate from breakfast, when she heard a sound she did not immediately place. It was not quite a knock. not quite a scratch. 3 short, deliberate contacts with the wood of the front door, spaced evenly, as if produced by something that had considered the gesture before making it. She stood still for a moment. The postman never knocked. The neighbors did not visit. She set the plate down in the rack and walked down the narrow hallway to the front door. She opened it. The fog was still thick at 8 minutes to 7. The lane was empty in both directions. The rowan tree stood in its indistinct outline at the garden wall, and, on the single stone step in front of the door, sitting with the composed attention of someone who has arrived for an appointment and expects to be received, was a cat, black completely. No white anywhere, no brown undertone, no grey at the tips. Black the way coal is black, the way a window is black at 3 in the morning. His coat was short and lay flat and carried the dampness of the fog in it. His eyes were amber, not yellow, not gold, amber, the dark, warm color of old resin, of something that had once been alive and had hardened into permanence. He was not large, not small. He had the proportions of something made correctly. He looked at her. She looked at him. He had no collar. "You're at the wrong door," Merewyn said. The cat did not appear to agree with this assessment. "Go on," she said. He remained perfectly still for a moment. Then, without hurry, he turned, walked down the garden path to the gate, stepped through the gap at the bottom of it, and disappeared into the fog. Merewyn closed the door. She stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the silence of the house. Then she went back to the kitchen and finished washing the plate and put the kettle on for the second pot of the morning, which she drank alone, standing at the kitchen window, watching the fog lift by increments from the rowan tree until the red berries came back into focus, vivid and insistent against the grey. He was there the next morning. Same step, same posture, same amber eyes, same quality of waiting that was not quite patience and not quite demand, but something precisely between the two, the waiting of something that has calculated the odds and found them acceptable. 6:49 in the morning. Merewyn had been awake since 5, as she usually was. She had brewed her 2 cups at 6:30. She had drunk one and watched the second cool and poured it away at 6:55. She had been standing at the kitchen window with the 3rd cup, the compensation cup, the cup that actually belonged to her and no one else, when she noticed the time and felt, without knowing why, that she should check the front door. She opened it and found him there and said, "You again." He said nothing. She studied him with the careful attention she gave to things she did not yet understand. He was dry, which meant he had found shelter somewhere through the night. He was not thin. He was not injured in any visible way. He carried himself with the ease of an animal that was not in distress, that had arrived here not because it had nowhere else to go, but because it had chosen this specific location for reasons of its own. "I don't have anything for you," she said. She was aware, as she said it, that this was not precisely true. There was, in fact, half a can of sardines in the refrigerator that she had opened 3 days ago, and then found she did not want. She had meant to throw them out. The cat held her gaze. She closed the door. She went to the kitchen. She stood in front of the refrigerator for a moment. Then she opened it and retrieved the sardines and carried them back to the front door. The cat was still there. She set the small saucer of sardines on the step beside him and stepped back inside and closed the door to a crack and watched through it. He sniffed the saucer once with the brief efficiency of something that already knew what it was and ate with neatness and speed and then sat back in the exact same posture as before. He was still there at 7:15. "Right," Merewyn said to herself, to the door, to no one. "Right." She went upstairs and made the bed. When she came back down and looked out the kitchen window, he was gone. He returned the following morning at exactly the same time. She had, the evening before, bought a tin of cat food from the shop at the end of the lane. She had done this without acknowledging to herself what it meant. She had needed a few other things: milk, bread, the particular kind of ginger biscuit that she allowed herself on Wednesdays, and the cat food had simply ended up in the basket alongside these things, and the woman at the till had not remarked on it, and Merewyn had not felt the need to explain. She fed him on the step again, and again, the following morning. On the 4th morning, she noticed the time, and it clarified something she had been half aware of. 6:50, 10 minutes before Callum used to wake. She had lived with that particular time for so long, had assigned it its particular weight of memory, that the coincidence struck her with a sharpness that she did not examine. She simply noted it. She fed the cat. She went inside. On the fifth morning, she opened the door and found him there and said, with the flat acceptance of someone surrendering to a fact, "I'm going to call you Shadow." The cat's ears moved, very slightly. "Don't read into that," she said. She fed him on the step. She watched him eat, and for the first time, when he had finished, she did not immediately go back inside. She stood in the doorway with her cup of tea and looked down the lane into the clearing morning fog and drank, and Shadow sat on the step below her and looked at whatever cats look at when they sit in open doorways in the early morning, and neither of them spoke, and it was the closest thing to company that Merewyn had felt in 11 years. She did not think this. She simply felt it in the way that cold water feels different from warm water without needing to be told. Souse. She did not let him inside for another week. This was intentional. She was not opposed to the cat. She was opposed to what the cat represented, which was the beginning of something, and beginnings were things she had learned to distrust. They implied middles. Middles implied endings. She had been living in a very long ending, and she had become, if not comfortable, then at least familiar with its particular requirements. On the sixth morning, it rained. Not the soft highland drizzle that locals treated as nothing, but a proper rain, driven sideways by a wind that had come down from the Pentland Hills overnight, cold and decided. Shadow was on the step when she opened the door, sitting at the center of it with the same composed expression, wet straight through to the skin, his coat plastered flat against his ribs, the amber eyes entirely untroubled by the water running down his face. He was not performing distress. That was what stopped her. A person could harden themselves against performance. She had seen enough of it in her life. People performing need, performing loneliness, performing the specific distress that they had calculated would open doors for them. She had not always been kind about this. She had a clear eye, and she had used it. But Shadow was not performing anything. He was simply wet. "Come in then," she said. He walked in. He crossed the threshold without hesitation, moved down the hallway with the calm purpose of someone navigating a space they had already considered, and stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked at the kitchen, the table, the 2 chairs, the 2 cups on the table, with a stillness that was complete and absolute. Then he walked to the mat near the radiator, turned once in a small circle, and lay down. He did not explore. He did not investigate. He did not knock anything over or vault onto any surface. He simply lay on the mat near the radiator and closed his eyes, and within a few minutes the wet of his coat had begun to steam very slightly in the warmth, and the kitchen smelled of rain and something else underneath it, something alive and specific that Merewyn had not smelled in a very long time. The kitchen smelled like 2 people lived in it. She sat down at the table with her tea, the first one, hers, and looked at him. "You're not staying," she said. Shadow breathed slowly. "This is temporary." He did not open his eyes. She drank her tea. He stayed. Not permanently, not at first. She still put him out at night, and he was always there on the step in the morning, and she told herself this was a reasonable arrangement. But within a week, he was sleeping by the radiator every evening, and within 2 weeks, he had claimed the broad arm of Callum's old chair in the sitting room, and Merewyn had said nothing about this, because saying something would have required her to care about it more than she was willing to admit she cared. She began to talk to him. This surprised her. She was not a person who talked to herself, or to animals, or to the absent. She had kept her silence for 11 years, with the discipline of someone who understood that language, once started, was difficult to stop. But the silence in the house had a weight to it, and Shadow had a quality of attention, a specific, unhurried, whole-body attention that made silence feel less like a choice and more like a missed opportunity. She started small. The weather, the state of the garden, whether the roses needed attention before winter set in. She spoke the way a person speaks to a companion who does not need to respond, which is the most honest kind of speaking there is. Then, gradually, larger things. "Callum would have liked you," she said one evening, while Shadow sat on the arm of the chair and watched her knit with the focused interest of a creature considering whether to intervene. "He always wanted a cat. I always said no. I had reasons." She paused. "I don't remember now what the reasons were. Shadow's tail moved slowly. "I was wrong about a few things," she said. She returned to her knitting. Shadow watched her for a while, and then laid his chin on the arm of the chair and looked at nothing in particular, and the fire in the grate moved quietly in its own way, and the house felt, for the first time in a very long time, not empty, but full of something soft and present and undemanding. She slept better that night than she had in months. The first sign came in the second week of October. Shadow had spent the morning in his usual patterns, the mat by the radiator, the sitting-room chair, a period of observation from the windowsill at the front of the house, watching the lane with the focused competence of something employed to do so. Merewyn had gone about her day in the way she always did, methodically, quietly, without waste. The shopping. A short walk. The letter to the water authority about the bill she had already paid twice. In the afternoon, she was standing in the hallway with her coat when she noticed that Shadow was not where she had left him. He was not in the sitting room, not in the kitchen. He was in the bedroom doorway. Not inside the room, she would have noticed that, but in the doorway, precisely at the threshold, sitting with his front paws together and his back very straight, facing in toward the room, toward the wardrobe on the far wall and the chest of drawers beside it and the chair in the corner where she draped tomorrow's clothes each evening. He heard her come up behind him and did not move. She looked past him into the room. Everything was as she had left it. Bed made, curtains pulled back to the precise angle that let in the morning light. Callum's reading lamp on his nightstand, still there, still where it had always been, because she had never found a reason to move it. "What are you looking at?" she said. Shadow turned his head and looked at her, and then looked back at the chest of drawers. Specifically, she realized, at the second drawer from the top, the one she kept closed. She had not opened that drawer in 11 years. It was the drawer that held things she had put there the week after the funeral because she could not decide what to do with them, and the not deciding had hardened over time into never. She had a general sense of what was in it. She did not examine this sense closely. "No," she said. Shadow sat perfectly still. "That is not your business," she said. He remained. She went downstairs. He returned to the bedroom doorway the next morning, and the morning after that. On the third morning, she sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at the drawer. She sat there for a long time. Shadow sat in the doorway and did not approach her, but his presence was in the room the way the presence of a person is in a room, specific, warm, and attentive. She opened the drawer. The first thing she saw was an envelope, cream-colored, slightly yellowed at the edges, unsealed. Her name on the front in Callum's handwriting, not the careful handwriting he used for official things, but the quick, loose handwriting he used for notes to her, the handwriting that looked like his voice, that had always looked like his voice, slightly rushed, slightly warm, leaning slightly to the right. Her hands were on the envelope for a long time before she picked it up. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. She unfolded it. It was a letter. Not finished. The last paragraph trailed off mid-sentence, and there was a pen line where the writing stopped, as if he had been interrupted. The date at the top was 3 weeks before he died. She had not known he had been writing to her. In 11 years, she had not known. She read it. She read it 3 times. It was not dramatic. It did not contain declarations. It was a letter in Callum's voice, which meant it was practical and warm and slightly self-deprecating in the way that men of his generation used humor to carry weight they did not know how to carry any other way. He wrote about the garden. He wrote about a walk they had taken in 1987 along the water of Leith, when the light on the water had been something neither of them could have described, but that both of them had felt. He wrote about Saoirse, about worrying that the distance between them was growing and that neither woman knew how to be the one to shorten it, and he had wanted to say something useful about this but had not found the right words yet, which was why the letter was unfinished. The last complete sentence read, "I think you are harder on yourself about this than anyone else would be, but I know you well enough to know you won't believe me when I say so." The pen line. The unfinished thought. Merewyn sat on the edge of the bed for a very long time. Shadow came into the room. He walked to the bed and sat beside her feet and pressed the side of his face against her ankle, once, deliberately, and then withdrew. She folded the letter carefully. She set it on the nightstand, beside Callum's reading lamp, not back in the drawer. That was the first thing. The second thing was the coat. It had been hanging in the hallway cupboard since the week of the funeral. Callum's good coat, the charcoal wool, one he wore to church and to dinners and to the occasions that called for the good coat, which were not many, but were the ones that mattered. She had meant to give it away. She had not given it away. It had been in the cupboard for 11 years, and she had stopped seeing it in the way that the eye stops seeing things that have always been there. Shadow found it on a Wednesday afternoon. Merewyn was in the kitchen when she heard the cupboard door. Not quite a knock, something brushing against it from the inside, which was impossible because Shadow was in the kitchen with her, except that Shadow was no longer in the kitchen. She turned, and he was not there. She heard the sound again and went into the hallway. Shadow was in front of the hallway cupboard with one paw pressed flat against the lower panel, the way a person presses against a door to feel whether there is warmth on the other side. He pressed, released, pressed. He was not trying to get in. He was attending to the door with the specific care of something trying to communicate through it. "What is it now?" Merewyn said. She opened the cupboard. The coat was there, as it had always been, on the hook at the back. The charcoal wool had kept its shape. It carried a smell. She had not opened this cupboard in a long time, a smell of cedar from the block she had put in years ago, and beneath it, fainter and older, something that belonged entirely to Callum. His particular warmth. She stood in the cupboard doorway. Shadow did not enter. He sat behind her and waited. She reached into the cupboard and took the coat down from its hook. She held it for a moment. It was heavier than she remembered, or perhaps she had forgotten the weight of a thing that had been carried by a specific person. She pressed her face into the shoulder of it for a moment, briefly, with the same deliberateness that Shadow had pressed his face against her ankle, and then she stood up straight. She carried the coat to the sitting room. She draped it over the back of Callum's chair. It was not the same as the coat being there, but it was not nothing either. Shadow walked past her, jumped onto the seat of the chair, carefully, respectfully, not onto the coat itself, but onto the front edge of the cushion below it, and curled up. Merewyn looked at him. "You're impossible," she said, but she sat down in her own chair across from him, and the room had a different quality to it, a slight adjustment, like a room where a painting has been rehung a few inches to the left, and now the proportion is right in a way it was not before. She fell asleep in the chair. She had not done that in years. The third thing was the box. It was under the stairs, in the low, dark space behind the winter boots and the old toolbox and the folded-up card table that had not been unfolded since Searce's last visit. A wooden box, pale and plain, with a small brass catch and no markings on the outside. Callum had put it there. She did not know exactly when, and she had never asked. And then she had not had the chance to ask, and the box had remained under the stairs in the manner of things that are not secrets exactly, but are private in a way that outlasts the person who made them private. Shadow found it on a Sunday. He had been investigating the understair space with a thoroughness that Merewyn found slightly excessive. She had been watching him with the resigned attention of someone who has already been surprised twice and has given up pretending to be above further surprise. He had moved aside a boot gently with one careful paw. He had stepped around the toolbox. He had pressed himself into the low, dark space at the back and then sat there in the dark, invisible except for two amber points of light, for long enough that Merewyn crouched down and said, "What have you found now?" He moved, and in moving he revealed the box. She had to retrieve it on her hands and knees, which was undignified, but the box came out easily, and she carried it to the kitchen table and set it down and looked at it for a while. She opened the catch. Inside, resting on a piece of cream fabric, a pressed flower. A white rose, flattened and dried to translucent, its petals the color of old paper. From their wedding day, she knew it immediately. They had married in June, and there had been white roses everywhere, and she had wanted to press one, but had not managed to, had thought they were lost, had assumed for 40 years that she had simply been too busy that day to save one. Callum had saved it. Below the flower, a photograph. Taken in 1994, at the cottage they had rented in Skye that summer, the last full summer before Searce moved out, the three of them in front of the whitewashed wall, with the sea behind them, and the light the way summer light on the islands is light. impossibly clear, specific to the north, something you can never quite explain to someone who has not stood in it. All three of them laughing at something. Merewyn could not remember what. She had not seen this photograph, had not known it existed. She sat at the table and looked at the photograph for a long time. Shadow had followed her from the understair space and was now sitting on the table beside the box, which she would normally have found unacceptable, but she did not move him. He sat with his paws together and his eyes on her face, with the full and steady attention he had given her from the first morning, the attention that asked for nothing and gave everything. "He kept things," she said. Shadow was still. "I didn't know he kept things." She looked at the photograph again. Sehersa was 22 in it. She was laughing with her eyes closed, the way young people laugh when they find something genuinely funny and are not yet calculating how they appear when they do. She had her father's jaw and her mother's stubborn posture, and she was radiant in the way that people are radiant when they do not know they are being photographed. Merewyn had not looked at a photograph of Sehersa in more than 2 years. She set the photograph carefully back in the box. She set the pressed flower back on top of it. She closed the box and carried it upstairs to the bedroom and set it on the nightstand beside the letter and Callum's reading lamp. The three things side by side, the lamp, the letter, the box. She stood and looked at them. She was aware, in the quiet way that a person is aware of the tide turning, that something had been in motion for several weeks now. That she had been led, carefully, patiently, through her own house to the things she had not been able to approach alone. She looked at Shadow, who had followed her upstairs and was sitting in the doorway again, in his customary position, with his front paws precisely together. "You've been very busy," she said. His tail moved once. "I'm not sure what you think you're accomplishing." He looked at her with the amber eyes that were calm and knowing, and she had begun to think, not entirely unaware of exactly what he was accomplishing. Ounce. She took him to the vet on the first Thursday in November. This was not sentiment. This was practicality. She had been feeding a cat for nearly 5 weeks. She was not foolish enough to do this without confirming that the cat was healthy and had no identifiable owner. She had checked the lane and the surrounding streets for notices. She had mentioned the cat at the shop at the end of the lane, and the woman there had not known him. The vet surgery was a 10-minute walk from Cairn Terrace, in a low stone building behind the main road. She carried Shadow in a borrowed basket with a latch that did not quite close properly, and he rode the journey with the composure he brought to everything, sitting upright and looking out through the gaps in the wicker as if taking note of the route. The vet was a man she had not seen before. Young. No, not young, she revised. Younger than she had expected, perhaps 45, with a quiet, serious manner and careful hands. His name was on the door in small letters, Dr. Tendai Chikwanda. He had a slight Zimbabwean accent, softened but present, the kind of accent that carries the particular precision of someone who learned English from excellent books and then spent 30 years using it in a rainy Scottish village, where it acquired a slight northern lilt without losing its original structure. He had the manner of a man who had seen many animals and many people, and had developed an equal respect for both. He examined Shadow with thoroughness and without hurry. Shadow sat on the examination table and submitted to this with a patience that the vet noted with a murmur of approval. "How long have you had him?" Dr. Chikwanda asked. "He is not mine," Merewyn said. Then, after a pause, "He has been visiting since October." The vet's expression did not change, but something in it relaxed slightly, the way an expression relaxes when a person decides not to say the thing they were about to say. "He's in good condition. No signs of illness, no apparent injury." He ran his hands carefully along the cat's spine. "Male, approximately 4 years old, I would estimate. Well fed." He paused. "Has he been checked for a microchip?" "I wouldn't know how to do that," Merewyn said. Dr. Chikwanda retrieved the scanner from the drawer beneath the table and passed it along Shadow's left shoulder, then his right, then the back of his neck. The scanner was silent. "No chip," he said. He continued examining. He was examining the back of Shadow's neck when he stopped. Not dramatically. He simply stopped moving for 1 beat longer than the examination required. His fingers were at the base of Shadow's neck, at the collar of thick fur there, and he was very still. "Mrs. Aldrin," he said. "Yes, there is something here." He moved the fur aside with careful fingers, slowly, the way a person parts grass to find something they are not yet sure is there. The fur at Shadow's neck was thicker than it appeared from the outside, a deep winter coat already coming in with the October cold, and within it, pressed flat against the skin, was a small piece of leather. Not quite a collar, too small, too simple. A loop. A thin strip of leather knotted at the nape, so small and so pale against the dark fur that it was invisible unless you were looking specifically, with good light and careful hands. And attached to the leather loop, no larger than a thumbnail, a tag. Not a proper pet tag, not metal, a small piece of ivory-colored card, laminated, with a hole punched through it and a tiny brass ring through the hole to attach it to the leather. The card was weathered. The lamination was soft at the edges. Dr. Chikwanda held the light close. He read what was on it. He did not speak for a moment. "Mrs. Aldrin," he said again, and something in his voice was different now. Careful, slow, like a man carrying something fragile across an uneven floor. "Yes," she said. He held out the tag. Merewyn took it. She held it in her fingers. The light in the examination room was good and steady, and the writing on the card was very small but entirely clear. 2 words. She knew the handwriting. She had known it for 52 years. She had been looking at it just last month on the letter she had found in the drawer. "Come home." The room was quiet. Dr. Chikwanda had become very occupied with making a note in his folder. Shadow sat on the table with the amber stillness that Merewyn had come to understand was not absence, but presence, concentrated, patient, sufficient. She looked at the tag. She looked at Shadow. The fog outside the surgery window pressed against the glass. October light, diffused and grey and specific to this latitude, to this village, to this particular morning on which everything had been ordinary until it was not. "How?" she said. It was not quite a question. Dr. Chikwanda did not attempt an answer. He understood, which was evident in the respectful quiet with which he occupied the room. He had been a vet in this village for 30 years, and he had learned that there were moments in which the professional thing and the human thing were the same thing, and that thing was simply to be still and let the person find their footing. She looked at the tag for a long time. She thought about the mornings. 6:50, 10 minutes before Callum used to wake, for 5 solid weeks without a single morning missed. She thought about the drawer, the coat, the box under the stairs. She thought about a man who had put a pressed flower in a wooden box and kept it for 30 years without mentioning it. A man who had been writing a letter, unfinished, who had wanted to say something useful about the distance between the 2 women he loved most, who had not found the right words in time. She looked at Shadow. She thought, he found other words. She folded the tag into her palm and closed her fingers around it. "I'll need to settle the bill," she said. Her voice was steady. She did not entirely know how. She did not call that day. She needed to walk home first. She needed to carry the basket with Shadow inside it, back through the November lanes, down past the butchers and the small newsagents, and the garden where the late chrysanthemums were still holding on in yellow and rust, and up Cairn Terrace to the 3rd house, and unlock the door, and set the basket down in the hallway, and open the latch. Shadow stepped out, crossed the hallway, went to the kitchen mat by the radiator, and lay down. Merewyn hung up her coat. She stood in the hallway for a moment. The house was very quiet in the particular way it was quiet on November mornings, when the stone walls held the cold outside and the warmth inside, and the silence between those 2 things was total. She could hear the radiator clicking. She could hear, very faintly, the sound of Shadow breathing on the mat. She went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. She set 2 cups on the table. She stood at the counter and watched the kettle. Behind her, on the table, the 2 cups waited. She had done this 10,000 times, give or take. She had done it without thinking. She had done it as a wound that would not close, as a ritual that sustained her and punished her in equal measure, as the only form of faithfulness she had known how to maintain. The kettle boiled. She poured 1 cup. She stood looking at the 2nd cup for a moment. Then she poured it too, all the way to the top, and she carried both cups to the table, and she sat down. She sat across from the empty chair. She drank her tea. The 2nd cup cooled on the table. She did not pour it down the drain. She simply left it there, present, untouched, accounted for. It did not need to be drunk. It had never needed to be drunk. It had needed, perhaps, only to be witnessed. She had been witnessing it alone for 11 years, and she had not known until this moment that witnessing was not the same as being seen. Shadow raised his head from the mat and looked at her. She looked back. "All right," she said. She found the phone in the sitting room on the small table beside her chair. It was a good phone, a sturdy one, given to her by Preston 2 Christmases ago, which she used primarily for messages to the shop when she needed something delivered. She had Sayas's number in it. She had had Sayas's number in every phone she had owned for 39 years. She had the current one memorized, the Melbourne number with its unfamiliar country code, which she had dialed so infrequently over the past several years that it had begun to feel like a number belonging to someone slightly foreign to her, a version of her daughter she knew from photographs and short messages and the occasional careful call at Christmas. She sat in her chair and held the phone. Shadow came into the sitting room. He crossed the floor without hurrying and jumped onto Callum's chair, the one with the charcoal coat still draped over the back, and settled himself in the front of it and looked at her. She looked at the phone. She looked at the photograph on the mantelpiece. It was not the one from the box. That one was still upstairs on the nightstand. This was a different one, older. Sayasa at perhaps 7 years old, sitting on a garden wall somewhere, her legs dangling, squinting into the sun with the expression of someone being asked to perform happiness and finding it slightly inconvenient. There was something genuine in the squint, something that had not changed entirely. Merewyn dialed. It rang 3 times. 4. She had calculated the time difference. It was early evening in Melbourne. A Thursday, Sayasa would be home. She was usually home on Thursdays, or had been the last time Merewyn had paid close enough attention to know. Perhaps things had changed. Perhaps— "Mum," the voice was immediate. Alert. Not the voice of someone disturbed from sleep or dinner, but the voice of someone who had, apparently, been expecting the call in the way that a person expects something they have not admitted to expecting. "Sayasa," Merewyn said. A pause. Short. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," Merewyn said. "Everything is all right. I just—" She paused. She had not planned what to say. She had sat down with the phone without planning anything, which was unlike her, which was perhaps the whole point. "I wanted to hear your voice." Another pause. Longer this time. She could hear, across 11,000 miles of ocean and cable and signal, her daughter breathing. She could hear, in the texture of that breathing, something release. Something that had been held for a long time. "Mum," Saoirse said, and her voice was different, softer. "I found some things," Merewyn said. "Your father's things. I want to tell you about them, if you have time." "I have time," Saoirse said. "Immediately. I have all the time." Shadow shifted on Callum's chair. He pressed his chin down onto his front paws and looked at Merewyn with the amber eyes that were steady and full and exactly the color of old resin. The color of something preserved. Merewyn settled back in her chair. She began to speak. They talked for 2 hours and 14 minutes. Merewyn knew this because she looked at the clock when she finally set the phone down on the table beside her, and the afternoon had gone entirely, and the room was in the blue-grey half-dark of early November evening, the kind of dark that arrives before you notice it coming, the kind that is not quite night. She had told Sayasa about the letter. She had read parts of it aloud, not all of it, but the part about the walk along the water of Leith and the part about the garden and the last complete sentence. She had heard Sayasa go very quiet. She had heard what quiet sounded like from the inside. She had told her about the photograph. The one from Sky, 1994, the 3 of them laughing at something none of them could remember. Sayasa had made a small sound at this, a sound that was not quite a word. "I didn't know he took that photograph," Sayasa said. "I didn't even know it existed." "Neither did I," Merewyn said. A pause. "He was always doing things like that," Sayasa said, quietly. "Without telling anyone." "Yes," Merewyn said. "He was." They talked about the distance. Not in the way they had talked about it before. Not in the guarded, measuring way of 2 people who each held the other responsible for a gap they both felt. They talked about it the way people talk about something when they have both decided to stop pretending it was someone else's fault. Merewyn said that she had not been easy to call. Sayasa said that she had not been easy to be called by. They sat with this for a moment, and it was not comfortable, but it was real. and real was better than comfortable by a very long margin. "I want to come," Saoirse said. "Don't do it because you feel you ought to," Merewyn said, which was the closest she could come to asking. "I'm not," Saoirse said. "I want to come. I want to sit in your kitchen and drink your terrible tea, and I want you to show me the photograph." Merewyn was quiet for a moment. "My tea is not terrible," she said. Saoirse laughed. It came out quickly, unexpectedly, the laugh of someone who had not been expecting to laugh but could not help it, and Merewyn heard in it the exact laugh from the sky photograph, the same quality, the same involuntary abandon, and something moved in her chest that was large and warm, and nothing like grief. Or rather, it was grief, but grief in the way that rivers are water, transformed, moving, going somewhere. "January," Saoirse said. "I can come in January, if that's all right." "January is fine," Merewyn said. She realized she was smiling. She was sitting alone in a darkening sitting room in November, smiling without being aware she had started. She had not smiled in the unself-conscious way that produces surprise in the smiler for some time. Years, perhaps. "There's something else," Merewyn said. "Something I need to tell you about." "What?" "A cat," Merewyn said. "A beat." "You have a cat?" "His name is Shadow," Merewyn said. "He's been here since October. He showed up at the door. You let a stray cat into your house." "I did not let him in immediately," Merewyn said with some dignity. "I exercised appropriate caution. It rained." Saoirse laughed again, and this time the laugh went longer, and this time Merewyn let herself laugh too, briefly, a small sound that surprised her by existing at all. "I want to meet this cat," Saoirse said. "He is extremely opinionated," Merewyn said. "I wonder where he gets that." Merewyn chose not to address this. After she set the phone down, she sat for a while in the darkening room without turning on the lamp. She did not need the lamp yet. The last of the November light was still coming in through the window, that long, level grey light that the north produces in the late afternoon of its short days, the light that makes ordinary rooms look considered and particular, as if the day is taking one last careful look at things before going. Shadow had not moved from Callum's chair. He sat on the front of it, with the charcoal coat behind him, looking at the window, his profile clean against the last light. Merewyn looked at him. He had been on the step every morning at 6:50. He had been led, patiently and precisely, through every room she had been avoiding. He had sat with her while she read a letter she had not known existed. He had been present at the vet's table when a man with careful hands had found, in a thick fold of dark fur, 2 words in handwriting she would know until she died. "Come home." She turned the words over. She had thought at first, at the surgery, in the immediate shock of it, that she could not understand the mechanism, that it was inexplicable. She was a practical woman. She did not entertain the inexplicable. But she had been sitting with it for several hours now, and a different understanding had settled in, alongside the one she could not account for, the way 2 truths can occupy the same space without cancelling each other out. Callum had been a practical man also. He had been a man who fixed things quietly, who noticed what needed doing and did it without announcement. He had pressed a flower from their wedding day and put it in a box under the stairs. He had been writing a letter about the distance between his wife and his daughter and had not finished it. He had been, in his whole life, a man who believed that things could be repaired if you were patient and specific and willing to do the work. She did not know how the tag had gotten onto Shadow's neck. She did not know, and she had decided, with the same practical deliberateness with which she made all her decisions, that she was not going to spend what remained of her life trying to know. There were things that could be explained and things that simply were, and the energy expended in refusing to accept the latter was energy taken from the former. What she knew was this: she had been home for 11 years, and she had not been coming home. She had been sitting at a table with 2 cups of tea every morning, keeping faith with a ghost and neglecting the living. She had let a distance become a distance, and then a wall, and then something so close to permanent that she had stopped noticing it was a choice. The cat on the step every morning. The drawer, the coat, the box. 2 words in small, deliberate writing on a piece of laminated card worn thin at the edges. She looked at Shadow. He had turned from the window. He was looking at her now, with the amber eyes that held the last of the light. "Thank you," she said. She said it simply, without elaboration. Shadow's eyes did not change. He held her gaze for a long moment with the quality of attention that had always, from the first morning on the step, felt like recognition. Then he turned back to the window. Merewyn turned on the lamp. The room came back into its ordinary proportions, warm and low-ceilinged and full of the things of a life lived in it, the books on the shelves and the worn arms of the chairs and the small pottery bowl on the windowsill that had always held keys and coins and the particular debris of daily existence. The room that had been empty for 11 years was not empty. She went to the kitchen and heated soup for her supper and ate at the table, 1 bowl, 1 spoon, 1 cup of tea, the appropriate number of each. The second cup sat in the cabinet. She looked at the cabinet for a moment. She looked at the single cup on the table. She felt the absence of the second one, but she felt it differently than she had felt it before, the way a healed place is different from an unhealed one. Still there, still known, but no longer the thing the whole body organizes itself around. She was eating her soup when Shadow came and sat beside her chair. Not on the table. He had learned, or had always known, that the table was not his domain. He sat on the floor beside her in the exact position that a person would sit in if they were joining someone for a meal without a chair, and he looked at nothing in particular, and she ate, and the kitchen was the size it had always been, which was exactly big enough. "Seasa is coming in January," she said. Shadow was still. "The house will need to be properly cleaned," she said. "There is a certain amount of cat hair on the sitting room chair that will need addressing before she arrives." Shadow appeared untroubled by this. "I mean the chair you have taken over," she clarified. He turned and looked at her with an expression that carried, she had come to think, a very specific quality of complete indifference to domestic logistics. "We will discuss this," she said. She finished her soup. December came. It came with its characteristic northern economy of light, the days shortening to something between morning and afternoon, with very little in between, the dark arriving by 3:30 with a matter-of-factness that the locals found unremarkable and that Merewyn had lived with for so long that she had ceased to experience it as loss. The dark was simply the North's way of being honest about winter. She respected that. She spoke with Seasa every Sunday now. She had not proposed this. Seasa had called the following Sunday without it being discussed, and Merewyn had answered, and they had talked for an hour, and Seasa had called again the Sunday after, and by the third Sunday it was simply what happened on Sunday evenings between 7 and 8 o'clock, and neither of them mentioned that this was new, because drawing attention to something that had not been there before was the fastest way to make it self-conscious and awkward. They talked about the children, Seasa's son Finn, 12, who played football with the particular commitment of someone converting religion, and her daughter Mara, 8, who had recently decided to become an illustrator of scientific atlases, a decision she had communicated to her parents and grandmother with the resolute clarity of someone who has already made the plan and is simply informing the relevant parties. Merewyn had spoken to Mara directly once, a brief conversation conducted with the careful formality of two people who do not yet know each other well and are both, in their different ways, taking the measure of the distance. "She has your manner," Seasa said afterward. "What manner is that?" Merewyn said. "The one that means you've already decided, but you're giving the other person the dignity of thinking they have a chance." Merewyn was quiet for a moment. "That's not a manner," she said. "That's just courtesy." Seasa laughed. The other thing December brought was snow. Not a great deal of it. Edinburgh did not get great quantities of snow as a rule, but this December produced several days of it, light and dry, the kind that dusted the stone of the lane and the garden walls and sat on the last of the brown leaves in the hedge like something applied with care. It made the lane look the way old photographs make places look, composed, deliberate, specific. Merewyn stood at the kitchen window on one of these mornings and looked at the lane and found that she was thinking of the sky photograph again. The particular quality of the light there, the way good light makes you remember where you were. She had ordered a frame for the photograph, a simple wooden one, pale, unvarnished. It had arrived in the post 2 weeks ago, and she had set it on the mantelpiece in the sitting room. She had also moved Callum's reading lamp, not far, just from his nightstand to the sitting room, to the small table beside his chair, the chair where Shadow spent his evenings. The lamp was on now, in the mornings when she drank her tea, and in the evenings when she sat with her knitting, and it cast the same warm circle it had always cast, and she sat within it, and she did not think of it as loss. On the last Sunday before Christmas, she told Saoirse about the tag. She had been keeping it, not deliberately. She had not decided to keep it from her daughter. She had simply not found the right moment, or rather, she had found the moment, but had not been quite ready for it, in the way that certain things need to be carried privately for a little while before they can be given over to being shared. She described it simply. The examination room, Dr. Chikwanda and his careful hands, the fold of thick fur at Shadow's neck, and the leather loop within it, and the small laminated card with the worn edges. She read the 2 words over the phone. "Come home." Saoirse was quiet for a long time. "Mum," she said. "I know," Merewyn said. "His handwriting?" "Yes." Another long quiet. "How?" Saoirse said. "I don't know," Merewyn said. "I've stopped trying to." A pause. "Are you all right?" Saoirse said. "I'm better than I was," Merewyn said. Which was true. Which was, she realized, the most honest thing she had said in a very long time. She heard Saoirse exhale, long and slow, the breath of someone setting something down. "January," Saoirse said. "I'm coming in January." "I know," Merewyn said. "I'll have the room ready. And I want to meet Shadow." "Shadow is very particular about people," Merewyn said. "I'll take my chances," Saoirse said. Christmas morning came quietly. Merewyn woke before the light, which was not unusual, and lay for a moment in the particular stillness of a house in the early hours of a day that has decided to be significant. The room was cold at the edges and warm at the center, where the duvet held the night's accumulated heat. She could hear the lane outside, or rather, she could hear its absence of sound, that specific muffled quiet of snow overnight, the world insulated in white. She rose. She put on her dressing gown. She went down the narrow stairs to the kitchen. Shadow was already on the mat. He looked up at her with the amber eyes that she had stopped finding startling, that she had come to find, on the contrary, the most reliable thing in the morning. He was there. He was awake. He was attending. Everything else could be built from that. She put the kettle on. She set 2 cups on the table. She stood at the window and looked at the lane. The snow was on everything, the garden wall, the rowan tree, the line of stone houses across the way, the gaps between the cobblestones. The berries from the rowan had nearly all gone now, taken by the birds through November, but there were a few remaining, red against the white, vivid and deliberate, the color of something that refused to be covered. The kettle boiled. She poured both cups. She carried them to the table and sat down, and she set 1 cup in the center of the table in front of her, and she set the 2nd cup to the side, not across from her, not in the empty chair, but beside her. Present, warm, not going anywhere. She looked at it. Then she reached into the pocket of her dressing gown and took out the small laminated tag on its pale leather loop. She set it on the table between the 2 cups. She looked at the 2 words in the handwriting she would know until she died. She was home. She had always been home. That had never been the question. The question had been whether she was willing to let anyone in. Shadow stood from the mat and walked to the table. He put his front paws on the edge of it, stretched, and then settled back down beside her feet. He pressed the side of his face briefly against her ankle and withdrew. His tail was still. His breathing was slow. Outside, the lane was quiet in the white morning. A light came on in the house across the way. Then another. Merewyn wrapped her hands around her cup and drank her tea, warm and plain, the way she had always taken it. Beside her, the 2nd cup steamed in the cold kitchen air. She did not pour it down the drain. January arrived. The morning Saoirse was due, Merewyn rose early and moved through the house with the attention she had not given it in years. Not cleaning, she had cleaned it thoroughly in the preceding days, but looking. Seeing it the way a person sees a thing when they know someone else is about to see it for the first time in a long time. The bookshelves, the sitting room with its 2 chairs and the lamp on the table, the photograph on the mantelpiece in its pale wooden frame, 3 people on a wall in sky, laughing in the impossible summer light, the coat on the back of Callum's chair, where she had left it, where it had remained. She had not moved the coat back to the cupboard. She did not intend to. Shadow sat on the sitting-room windowsill and watched the lane with the focused competence she had come to think of as his particular job in the household, a function he had assigned himself and performed without variation. The lane outside was grey and cold in the January morning, the last of the snow gone now, the cobblestones damp and dark. The taxi appeared at the end of the lane at 10 minutes. Shadow saw it before she did. He sat up, his ears oriented forward. His tail, which had been hanging loose over the edge of the windowsill, went still. Merewyn was in the kitchen, but she heard the change in the room. She came to the sitting-room doorway. Shadow was at the window. She looked past him to the lane. The taxi had stopped. The door was opening. Saoirse stepped out. She was wearing a coat Merewyn did not recognize, dark green, practical, slightly too thin for a Scottish January, which was exactly the kind of thing a person wore when they had been living in Melbourne for 16 years and had forgotten, in the cellular way, what January felt like here. She had Merewyn's posture. She had her father's jaw. Her hair had grey in it now, more than Merewyn had expected, and she was carrying a bag over one shoulder and looking at the houses on the lane with the expression of someone retrieving something from a very long way down. She looked up and saw Merewyn in the doorway. They looked at each other for a moment across the lane and the garden path and the small gate and all the years. Saoirse raised her hand. Merewyn raised hers. Then Saoirse came up the path and Merewyn stepped back to let her through the door, and they held each other in the narrow hallway of the stone house on Cairn Terrace, in the way that people hold each other when they have been calculating the distance between them for too long and have finally stopped calculating. Neither of them said anything. They did not need to. When they separated, Saoirse was looking past Merewyn's shoulder at the sitting room. Shadow was in the doorway. He was sitting very still, with his front paws precisely together, his back straight, his amber eyes moving from Merewyn to Saoirse and back to Merewyn with the slow, unhurried attention he gave to all new information. He was not retreating. He was not performing welcome. He was simply present, in the manner he had always been present, specific and complete. Saoirse looked at him. He looked at her. "This is Shadow," Merewyn said. Saoirse crouched down, carefully, so that she was at his level. She did not reach for him. She simply looked, with the same waiting patience her mother had learned over the past 3 months. She held out one hand, palm down, and waited. Shadow looked at the hand. He looked at Saoirse's face. Then he walked forward, 2 steps, and pressed the top of his head briefly but deliberately against the back of her hand. He withdrew. He turned. He walked back to the sitting room and resumed his position on the windowsill, looking out at the lane with the focused attention of something that has completed a task and returned to its post. Saoirse stood up slowly. She looked at Merewyn. "He's very particular about people," Merewyn said. "You mentioned," Saoirse said. They went to the kitchen. Merewyn put the kettle on. Saoirse sat down at the table and looked around the kitchen, the 2 chairs, the low window over the garden, the familiar arrangement of a room she had grown up in, and her eyes were bright in the way that eyes are bright when something behind them has been pressing forward for a long time and has finally been given room. "Tell me about the box," she said. "I'll show you," Merewyn said. She went upstairs. She retrieved the wooden box from the nightstand, alongside the letter and the laminated tag. She carried them down to the kitchen and set them on the table between the 2 cups of tea. Saoirse looked at them the way a person looks at something they were not sure still existed. They sat for a long time. The pressed flower, the photograph, the letter in the handwriting that looked like his voice, the tag with the 2 words. Outside, the January garden was bare and brown and patient, in the way of gardens in winter, not absent, not finished, but between one thing and the next, holding its breath, already planning what it would do with the light when it came back. Merewyn picked up the photograph and handed it to her daughter. Saoirse held it. Her eyes went to the laughing faces, to the sea behind them, to the summer light that was specific and irretrievable and completely present in the photograph. She found her own face in it, the squinting, laughing, unself-conscious girl on the wall. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. From the sitting room came the sound of Shadow adjusting his position on the windowsill, the small shift of weight, the brief settling. A sound that had become, over 3 months, the sound of the house being occupied and warm and not empty. Saoirse looked up at her mother. Her mother looked back at her. The kettle had long since been drunk. The kitchen was warm. Outside the low window, a blackbird landed on the garden wall, looked once at the bare rose bushes, and began to make its way along the stone with the purposeful, unhurried movement of something that knows exactly where it is going and sees no reason to rush. Shadow watched it from the windowsill. His tail hung loose over the edge. He was completely still, completely at ease,